Dear friends, dear comrades, may I invite you to take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Africa Week. Welcome to this conference. Your presence here at this crucial moment in the future of our shared destiny is a testament to your commitment to addressing the pressing challenges we face today. We are very much honored to welcome the President of Burkina Faso, His Excellency Roch Kaboré, and we are delighted that he gives us the honor to share his views today with us. We are honored the same way for the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, our friend Federica Mogherini. Welcome, both of you, to this important event, and welcome all our guests, the friends from organizations, partnerships, of course my fellow colleagues, MEPs, especially from our family, the Socialists and Democrats. We are demonstrating our commitment to our neighboring countries, to our neighboring continent, of which we think Africa and Europe, yes, we are natural partners. I thank and applaud you all for your dedication for our two continents whose history and geography are so closely connected. This is the third year that our excellent staff, that our MEPs organize this investment in our partnership, and we are very well aware that our engagement towards Africa has to be a continuous one, not a once in a while exercise, but common practice. It is a unique opportunity to come together and to push forward for new ways, for new solutions, and for a new partnership, of course, what else, on equal footing. It is also a chance to challenge our current politics and decisions together with the young generation. This is very important this year. We want to listen to the young generation from both sides, because it's up to them to build our common future. We are fully convinced that Africa is not a problem, but rather a huge chance. It is an opportunity if we work together to use these chances. The future of Europe is linked to the future of Africa. Our battle as European Socialists and Democrats for human rights, for democracy, against climate change, for fair trade, for sustainable development and security is the same battle as that of our friends in the African nations. We have to tackle the challenges together. And this is why we also have to change the paradigm, the typical European paradigm, even of those full of goodwill. No, we are not talking anymore about Africa. No, we are not organizing goodwill and politics for Africa. No, we want to collaborate with Africa. We want to be your partners. This is what we have decided to do, and this is what we set against all the populists and nationalists in Europe. Their wall, their racism, and their ideas of European fortress is unjust, it's immoral, and it's wrong. And this is not our policies. We know about the challenges. We cannot ignore the narrative of migration. But we need to know and to discuss about the root causes. Many people talk about poverty, lack of quality education, social inequality, climate change, family planning, so on and so forth. But without concrete conclusions, without concrete recommendations, we will not truly address these issues. We think we need this intensive dialogue with Africa because we need partnership based on ownership and responsibility. It's our duty for the future generations, not only as political leaders, but also as human beings. We know about the developments, demographic ones as well in Africa, but we regard that as being a chance to invest in our people, to invest in your people. We see faces of hope if we see people who are making their way to Europe, but they are risking their lives, and far too many have found the death in the Mediterranean or elsewhere. So we are clearly stating those who have to flee have to have a safe place in our nations, in our countries. Those who would like to find a better future have to find an open hand, have to find legal ways of migration which are not endangering their lives. But the main issue we have also to talk about is the richdom of the African nations. Yes, many Africans are poor, but if we would give back what belongs to the African nations, if we would help to develop the resources in your countries, not in the way of exploiting it, but in the way of being truthful partners, what kind of future could come into existence within Africa and within our partnership? This is what we would like to talk about, and this is why we have to change. We in Europe have to change. We started in our group a discourse about sustainable development. We adopted the Sustainable Development Strategy in our battle plan for the forthcoming mandate. Yes, we would like to live up to these challenges agreed for Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations for 2030. Because the lesson to be learned is that Europe has to change in its policies. Its foreign policies, its agricultural policies, its trade policies. If we do not change and become sustainable partners, how can we expect from others to organize change in their countries? This is a precondition of a good partnership, that we change the course in Europe towards sustainability. That means radical change in our agricultural policies, yes, to small-scale farming, family farming, that deserves to be promoted, and not the huge industrialized form of agricultural policy that brings bad ways of experts and more hunger than before. This is a challenge to the European Union. This is only to name one example of relevant policies. I could continue on fisheries, I could continue on many, many issues. But what you should get to know today, our group, the progressives in the European Parliament, we stand ready to change, and we fight for this change. And this is the very reason why I'm so happy to have you here, to have our experts here. Since we are only having 1 hour today, I'm more than happy to directly hand over to His Excellency President Marc Caboret for his now keynote speech, which he will address to us. Please. The final organizational remark, you find English and French translation in front of you, whatever you'd like to hear.
Monsieur le Président, honorables députés du groupe de l'Alliance progressiste des socialistes et démocrates, chers invités, mesdames et messieurs, avant tout propos, permettez-moi de vous transmettre les salutations du peuple burkinabé que j'ai l'ainsi honneur de représenter à cette tribune. Je voudrais également témoigner ma reconnaissance à M. Udo Bullmann, qui a bien voulu m'inviter à prendre part à cette 3e édition de la Semaine africaine organisée sous l'égide du Parlement européen. C'est l'occasion pour moi de saluer la vitalité du groupe de l'Alliance progressiste des socialistes et démocrates et de vous remercier pour votre engagement à nos côtés depuis 2015, notamment au cours de la transition politique de notre pays et de l'organisation des élections présidentielles et législatives à l'issue desquelles nous avons obtenu la confiance de notre peuple. Vous sachant très attachés aux valeurs légendaires d'amitié et de solidarité qui lient l'Afrique et l'Europe, je ne doute pas un seul instant de votre engagement à continuer à explorer les meilleures voies et moyens pour contribuer au plein épanouissement des peuples africains et européens. L'organisation de cette 3e édition de la Semaine africaine est la preuve de la volonté de poursuivre les échanges en vue d'orienter le partenariat Afrique-Europe dans le sens qui garantisse la préservation des intérêts bien compris de nos populations respectives. À cet effet, le phénomène de migration, dont les effets et les conséquences affectent profondément nos communautés de part et d'autre, constitue une préoccupation suffisamment brûlante qui mérite que nous marquions une halte pour partager nos préoccupations, nos interrogations et bien sûr nos propositions de solutions. Monsieur le Président, honorables députés, Mesdames et Messieurs, je note que malgré de vigoureuses mesures restrictives prises ces dernières années par les États européens pour décourager les migrants clandestins, ceux-ci se retrouvent néanmoins à leur porte. Le drame de cette migration, c'est qu'elle défie non seulement les lois de nos pays, mais également le respect du droit à la vie des candidats. Au risque de leur vie, ces migrants deviennent des proies faciles aux marchands d'illusions et aux trafiquants qui les jettent dans des situations de détresse, de fragilité et d'exploitation. Nos États ne peuvent pas continuer à rester indifférents à cette tragédie de l'immigration clandestine. Notre conscience est interpellée pour y trouver des solutions viables et durables. Nous nous devons de mutualiser nos réflexions et nos actions. Mais avant, il nous faut comprendre les causes profondes du phénomène afin de pouvoir éradiquer le mal à sa racine. Car ces mouvements internationaux de population influencent, dans un sens ou dans un autre, le développement économique et social, voire la stabilité politique des pays de départ, de transit et d'accueil. Mieux, les effets des migrations sont incontestables sur le présent et l'avenir du partenariat Afrique-Europe. Monsieur le Président, honorables députés, Mesdames et Messieurs, pour ce qui concerne le Burkina Faso, j'estime que les causes des migrations sont multiples et variées. Elles sont d'ordre politique, économique, social que culturel. En la matière, notre pays connaît une longue tradition de migration, d'abord en tant que point de départ vers des pays voisins que sont le Ghana et la Côte d'Ivoire, de transit vers des destinations plus éloignées, notamment vers l'Europe en passant par le Maghreb. De la gestion que nous avons pu faire du phénomène, il ressort clairement que ce sont des centaines de milliers de personnes qui s'y livrent régulièrement. Ceux qui quittent leur pays, leur famille, leurs proches et leur culture ne le font pas de gaieté de cœur. C'est parfois au bout de longues souffrances cumulées qu'ils décident de tout abandonner à la recherche d'un mieux-être ailleurs. Dressant l'état des causes profondes de ces migrations qui tournent régulièrement au drame, on ne peut pas passer sous silence les difficultés économiques que connaissent nos pays qui les empêchent de générer une croissance à même de satisfaire les besoins fondamentaux de l'ensemble des populations. À cela se conjugue une croissance démographique en cruel déphasage avec la croissance économique, ce qui entraîne un taux élevé de chômage. Il faut ajouter à tout cela également la dégradation de l'environnement en général, les changements climatiques qui ne permettent pas aux populations qui tirent majoritairement leurs revenus de l'agriculture d'avoir les moyens de subsistance conséquents et durables dans leur terroir. Le problème fondamental que pose le phénomène de migration est incontestablement celui de notre capacité à assurer à tout être humain la possibilité de vivre dignement dans son propre pays ou dans un autre pays où il décide de s'établir en toute légalité. Partout où les gens ne se sentent pas en sécurité, et en sécurité physique économiques et politiques, ce sont les germes de migration qui sont sémés à profusion. Pour nous donner des chances d'enrayer le phénomène, il faut donc mutualiser nos efforts en matière d'élimination de la pauvreté, de la justice sociale, de la paix et de la protection des droits humains, de la démocratie et de la bonne gouvernance. Telles sont les options que le Burkina Faso a faites à la faveur de l'insurrection populaire qui a ouvert une nouvelle ère de reconquête des libertés fondamentales. Monsieur le Président, honorables députés, Mesdames et Messieurs, le Plan national de développement économique et social du Burkina Faso, notre référentiel, a pour ambition d'assurer un mieux-être des Burkinabés à l'horizon 2020, grâce à une mobilisation significative des ressources internes et au soutien de nos partenaires. Il s'agit de transformer structurellement l'économie pour apporter des solutions durables aux problèmes d'éducation, de santé, de production agricole, de nutrition, de création d'emplois et d'opportunités économiques pour les jeunes et pour les femmes, tant en milieu rural qu'en milieu urbain, mais aussi d'améliorer la gouvernance. Nous sommes convaincus qu'aussi longtemps qu'il y aura de très grandes différences de croissance économique entre nos pays et ceux d'Europe, il nous sera difficile de combattre efficacement le phénomène des migrations. Les causes sont certes diverses, allant de la croissance démographique, la pauvreté, le terrorisme, la gouvernance politique, aux conflits et guerres de toute nature, mais elles restent essentiellement économiques. Il nous faut donc renforcer le partenariat dans le sens d'une réduction considérable des écarts. C'est à mon avis la meilleure manière d'agir sur les causes des migrations en créant les conditions du maintien des populations dans leur terroir. Plus les fruits de la croissance seront partagés, plus nous aurons la chance de freiner le phénomène. Plus nos populations pourront bénéficier des conditions nécessaires et suffisantes pour produire, exporter et vivre de leur travail, se soigner, éduquer, assurer une vie digne et un avenir à leurs enfants, moins elles seront tentées par les aventures dramatiques des migrations clandestines. Nous ne devons pas perdre de vue la nécessité de garantir la participation de nos populations dans la gestion des affaires publiques, car plus elles seront consultées sur les décisions qui les concernent, qui impactent leur vie, plus elles pourront adhérer aux différents projets et programmes que nous mettons en œuvre en vue de leur mieux-être. Honorable Monsieur le Président, honorables députés, Mesdames et Messieurs, au regard des conséquences multiples et multiformes du phénomène des migrations sur la stabilité de nos pays, mais aussi, surtout, sur le partenariat entre l'Afrique et l'Europe, il me paraît judicieux d'en bien comprendre les causes afin de mieux agir sur les effets. La longue expérience de coopération entre nos deux continents nous renseigne suffisamment sur nos faiblesses, mais aussi sur nos forces. Pour ma part, j'engage mon pays, le Burkina Faso, à poursuivre la réflexion sur la question des migrations afin d'apporter nos meilleures contributions à une gestion du phénomène au nom de la solidarité entre les peuples et en faveur du respect de la dignité humaine. C'est pourquoi nous serons présents à la conférence internationale de haut niveau chargée d'adopter le pacte mondial pour les migrations sûres, ordonnées et régulières qu'organisent les Nations Unies en décembre prochain. L'avenir du partenariat entre l'Afrique et l'Europe se trouve dans la capacité des acteurs des deux continents à créer de part et d'autre les conditions de production et d'échange qui concourent à la sécurité, à la libre circulation légale et légitime des personnes et de leurs biens, à la solidarité et à l'amitié entre les peuples. Vive le partenariat dynamique fructueux et gagnant-gagnant entre l'Afrique et l'Europe pour que vive un avenir radieux et prospère pour nos peuples. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Many, many thanks, President, and be assured that we, the Progressive Forces, will not allow European countries to turn their back on the multilateral initiatives under the umbrella of the United Nations. Now it's time for Federica. We are keen to listening to your keynote speech. Please address our guests.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Udo. Permettez-moi de commencer par un remerciement au Président Caboret. C'est un plaisir toujours de le voir ici à Bruxelles ou en Afrique et en particulier dans sa région avec laquelle on travaille si bien et assez, je pense, même si c'est jamais assez, il faut toujours faire plus. Je voudrais commencer par le remercier, lui et toute sa délégation, le ministre, pour tout le travail qu'on a fait et qu'on continue à faire avec le Burkina Faso, avec le groupe des 5 pays du Sahel. Et je pense que votre pays est aujourd'hui en quelque sorte un symbole de l'Afrique. C'est un pays qui fait face à des défis énormes sur le point de vue de la sécurité, du développement, de sa jeunesse. Mais en même temps, c'est un pays qui a choisi clairement la démocratie. C'est un pays qui, après des décennies de coups d'État, a trouvé la voie vers la démocratie. C'est un pays jeune, plein d'énergie. Je dois dire l'Union européenne et moi personnellement, nous sommes orgueilleux d'être les premiers donateurs, les premiers partenaires pour le Burkina Faso et pour la région. Et je pense que ça nous indique la voie, la bonne voie, placer la jeunesse africaine au centre de notre travail. Ça nous permettra de trouver l'énergie, je pense, de relever nos défis communs. Donc, merci, parce que, comme Udo l'a dit, certains aperçoivent l'Afrique comme un problème. Je suis convaincue que nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour dire que l'Afrique est la source d'inspiration pour trouver les solutions aux problèmes d'aujourd'hui ensemble. Donc, merci pour le travail que vous êtes en train de faire et pour l'amitié et le partenariat que nous avons établis dans ces derniers ans. I'll switch to English to thank you, Udo, and the group, because this is the third time I'm here with you opening this week. This is the third important meeting that the group promotes on Africa, and I think that it is somehow revolutionary these days to have a conversation on our partnership with Africa beyond migration. I know that in this room this goes without saying. This seems self-evident that we cannot even imagine of having a partnership with a continent based on one issue, yet very relevant, but one only. And I think that having the courage and the vision of saying we have to work and we need to work on our partnership beyond migration with Africa, with the European Union on your side, is exactly the right political message to send. So thank you for this. I think this is exactly the kind of message we need in Europe today. Yesterday, I know you celebrated Nelson Mandela's 100 years. And he was a man who managed to inspire entire generations all across the world. His fight for freedom and justice was first and foremost for the people of his country, indeed a revolution. But it soon became a symbol of something much bigger. And all of a sudden, the story of one man and one country started to speak to the whole world and brought change across the world. Madiba's liberation and his election sent a message of hope that touched the hearts and the minds of people all across the globe. It was a message of democracy, a message of social justice, equal opportunities for all, beyond ethnicity, beyond faith and social background. But it was also a message of reconciliation inside countries and among countries. He imagined a world where all countries had the same rights and where international relations could be and had to be based on cooperation and partnership. At that moment in time, Africa was at the center of the world with his inspiring revolutionary message. Mandela's ideas inspired for sure my generation, but also many others. And I would say gave us strength and courage to face things that were perceived as impossible. My favorite quote from him is that everything seems impossible until it's done. And I think this is something we should keep in mind, especially in Europe nowadays. But today, international relations are not the same that Mandela used to imagine. We face the return to a more dangerous way of interpreting, understanding, living global politics. A way of interpreting international relations based not on cooperation and partnership, not on win-win solutions, but more and more often as a power game, as a zero-sum game. Many of us have the feeling that there is little hope to move towards a more cooperative global order, and it is indeed very difficult in these days to be optimistic and to stay optimistic. But let me tell you that a big part of the world's future, but also the world's present, depends on Africa, and also depends on our partnership. I know that Africa doesn't always perceive itself as a major global player. Well, it is. Look at the numbers, look at the demography, look at the richness, natural resources of the people. You are a big global player, and together, Europe and Africa can shape the features of international relations in quite a revolutionary way. And I often say, maybe for someone like me that comes from a place that geographically is quite close to Africa, it's natural. But today, it's all of the European Union that is aware of the strategic importance of the European-African partnership. It was probably not the case a few years ago, but today, this is reality. I often make reference to an anecdote that explains very well how close we are. Only 17 kilometers away. But it happened to me once to fly from Tunis, Africa, to Malta, that at the time was holding the European Union presidency. And I was flying south. If you fly from Tunis to Valletta, you're flying south. This to say that even the paradigm of a north-south divide nowadays is something we need to challenge together. We cannot do it alone as Europeans. I think you cannot do it alone as Africans. But I think this is the challenge we are facing together, and this would be a service that we do not only to our people, but also to the rest of the world. As I was saying, Africa has a role to play, even has a responsibility to play when it comes to shaping international relations. This is not just because most of the world's demographic growth is happening inside Africa. It's also about an idea of international relations and global politics. In our daily engagement, we are showing that a more cooperative governance of global affairs is not just possible, it is, but it is actually the only effective way to deal with the challenges of our times. A global governance that is based on cooperation inside the regions, and Africa is experiencing on a daily basis a strengthening of its regional and sub-regional organizations that I think inspires many of us. Is also inspired by much of what we have done in Europe, but this is a continuous, I would say, learning process in which we exchange experiences. So a governance based on cooperation inside the regions and among the regions. And I'm happy to say that in these years we have invested so much in our relations with the sub-regional organizations and with the African Union in an unprecedented manner. A governance that has inclusive growth and the fight against inequalities as its core objectives. We don't say that often, but I think this is it, and we have to face reality as it is. We often talk about the root causes of migration, naming poverty or climate change. Let's call things with their names. We're talking about inequalities, an unequal distribution of wealth and resources around the world. This is what we are talking about when we talk about the root causes of migration. Also conflicts and crises, and many of them are caused exactly by inequalities and unequal distribution of resources. We together, I think, can promote the idea that we share as Africans and Europeans that it is an illusion, it is a false illusion to think that if my neighbor is strong in a sense of competition, this creates a problem to me. I think we have understood out of our history, both in Africa and in Europe, that if my neighbor has a problem, I also have a problem. And the best way to invest in my strength is investing in my neighbor's strength. This is how the European Union was built after having experienced centuries of conflict and competition and wars. And I believe this is the lesson that also the African continent has learned over its history. This is the kind of cooperation we have started to establish with Africa in these years. Beyond the donor-recipient relation, we went from the idea of having projects for Africa, which is something good and that we continue to do, to the idea of working with Africa, as Udo was saying, towards our common interests. It is true that part of our work these years has focused on migration, and particularly on fighting traffickers and helping people getting out of their hands. I think this is a common interest we share. We finally realized that management of migration flows is not a south-north divide, but it's a common interest to manage together a complex challenge, also because most of the African countries are at the same time countries of origin, of transit, and of destination nowadays. So we have a common challenge to deal, and only together we can deal it. I can make to you the example. Last year, during the summit we had with the African Union in Abidjan, we decided that we wanted to tackle the awful situation in the detention centers in Libya. We established a joint task force, European Union, United Nations, African Union, and we managed in a few months to liberate tens of thousands of men and women from the detention centers and bring them safely back home with the support they need to start their lives again. And this was made possible exactly because of our partnership and cooperation. Europe would have not done it alone. Africa would not have done it alone, and the United Nations neither. Out of this cooperation, out of this partnership, we managed to bring results. And this needs to continue, because we might fall into the illusion that this is done. It's not. We need to sustain the work that has been started. This is just one starting point of our cooperation. I know our time is limited, but let me mention one other important point that is at the center of our work, which is the work on security. We are exploring new ways to cooperate for our common security. Our cooperation with the G5 Sahel in this respect is particularly innovative. We started from a very basic idea that no one knows Africa's true security needs better than the people of Africa, and so our African partners are now defining their needs and the strategy, and we are giving our support to their initiatives, like in the G5 Sahel, because that is also in our own interest. Sustainable security is essential for sustainable development, and this is a pressing need. Yet this is definitely not enough to guarantee a better present and a better future for Africans. And so I come to the real center of our cooperation, and I close on this. That is beyond migration, beyond security. Our cooperation is now driven by two main goals: create good jobs and good opportunities for the African youth, and engage constantly with the young people of Africa. And I'm happy to see here youth representatives, because the rhetoric, the narrative of you being the future for Africa is simply not matching reality. You are the present of the continent. And the only way to get it right is to let you influence the policies we are putting in place. We have established, as European Union, or together with the African Union, initiatives to have the young generations of Africa and of Europe and of the diaspora heard, and their voices that are very clear and loud get to the decision-making process. We've established, in particular, a youth plug-in initiative that created an opportunity for young people to create proposals on concrete projects. I'm happy to say that next week in Paris, they will be at the Peace Forum to present their ideas to world leaders and influencers to make these projects reality, and some of them are supported by the European Union. And let me finish by saying that I'm proud of the work that we have started to do. It's still a long way to go. It will require a lot of political courage, determination, also resources, partnership, patience from time to time. But I think we are on the right track to change the paradigm from the old traditional cooperation, development cooperation based only partnership, to an equal partnership of friends, but let me say more than friends, brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Many, many thanks, Federica. As always, leading to the horizon, being pragmatic but also radical enough to open the door for a joint future. Thanks for your contribution. Thanks, President. Please allow me to give also a special welcome to your High Representative, you team, and to all of you that were coming in your team to be with us today. This was an excellent exercise to see how many important people you bring to us, to Brussels. And let me also give a special welcome to my most active colleagues, Cecile Kienge, Boris Sala, Elena Valenciano, our Vice President, who will very soon take over here and have the chair in the next panel. Linda McAvan, our chair of the Development Committee, and Maria Arena, coordinating the ACP community for us. So many active people from our side as well. So we are able to have a good match also for the future. We have, unfortunately, limited time in this first round. We can open the floor only in the second round, but since we are so dearly keen to listen to young people today in the first place, the two experts of the High Representative and the President, I'm very happy that they agreed on a short set of short questions and interventions and stand ready to answer to our young guests. The first question I would like to give the floor to Farai Gwenair from Zimbabwe with the pledge to be very quick so that you can receive an answer. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for this opportunity to ask a question. My question is directed to President Kabore. While we appreciate the efforts that the EU is placing on this issue of migration and assisting Africa, we still feel as a group that the African leaders haven't done enough in terms of economic and political management of our countries. So we thought the idea that the African countries had adopted of peer review mechanisms of at least reviewing each other and giving each other recommendations was going to improve how we govern our countries. So my question is, why did we abandon that particular path? And when we abandoned that particular path, what was the thought of an alternative to that particular path? Because when support comes from the EU, as the plans have been laid by the previous speakers, we will still have challenges of mismanagement of particular support and resources. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Next question could come from Guaratu Songo from Burkina Faso. Please. Should work, yes. Push the button. The red button.
Ça marche? Ok. Merci pour la parole. Je suis Zongo Guaratu. Voilà. Ma question va adressée à mon président, Monsieur Son Excellence Christian Kabore. C'est sur le thème de la sécurité. Pouvez-vous nous assurer que les dispositions sont prises suite aux attaques qui sont tout le temps dans le Burkina Faso? Donc nous vous demandons de nous assurer si vraiment des solutions sont prises sur ce plan. Donc franchement, la population est inquiète. Donc j'ai eu l'occasion de poser la question, donc c'est franchement notre préoccupation. C'est vrai que vous êtes un président qui nous écoute, mais comme nous sommes sur le plan international, l'occasion m'est permise de vous poser cette question. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. The next question is coming from Tuuli Pitkanen from Finland, who is also a representative of the young socialist generation in Europe.
Thank you very much, Udo, and thank you for having the Young European Socialists as part of this discussion. In this topic, there is one specific question that has been raising a lot of discussion within the Young European Socialists during the past year, which is the current situation at the Mediterranean. So, as we know, in June and July, there were the deathless months so far in the Mediterranean, where more than 850 people lost their lives. In order to tackle this tragedy, there are a lot of NGOs, sea rescue missions, NGOs that are trying to save lives in the Mediterranean, even now. And these NGOs have done remarkable work, saving more than 110,000 lives so far. And my question would be that now we also see that the work of these NGOs is being stopped by some politicians, which is a human tragedy and very terrifying from our point of view. And even some European politicians are directly standing against the sea rescue missions. So my question would be, what can and should be done to defend the work of these NGOs at the Mediterranean? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tuli. And the very last one is Kelly Ann Vondersen, having a Dutch Cameroonian background and is insofar also speaking for the African diaspora. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. My question is addressed to High Representative Mogherini, and it is specifically about migration in relation to human rights abuses in the transit of migrants from Libya into the Mediterranean. Now, we know that migration is a complex and multifaceted problem, and the youth in the diaspora are very concerned about human rights abuses. How does the European Union aim to ensure that the plans that are being drawn up and have already been drawn up will not bolster or feed into human rights abuses while migrants are in transit or arriving at refugee camps? Because we know as long as Libya is destabilized, it will be a route for people who are desperate to leave and seek a better future. So how does the European Union aim to ensure that the financial resources, and non-financial resources as well, end up in the hands of those who will help migrants rather than exploit these unfortunate situations and circumstances? Thank you very much.
Speakers who put forward their questions. President Caboret, 2 questions for you and 2 questions for Federica. Would you like to start?
Oui, tout à fait. Ben, je voudrais, par rapport d'abord au jeune de Zimbabwe, qui a posé une question qui est relative à la question de la migration et à la responsabilité du côté africain également du développement de cette migration. Je pense que on ne peut pas considérer simplement que la migration est un problème qui regarde simplement l'Europe. C'est un problème de bonne gouvernance, comme nous l'avons dit. C'est un problème de développement de politiques adéquates pour permettre effectivement la création d'emplois et le développement dans nos propres pays. Et comme vous l'avez souligné, nous avons également en son temps lancé le principe du mécanisme d'examen par les pairs, qui devait permettre à des équipes pluridimensionnelles d'autres pays de pouvoir faire le constat de la progression aussi bien démocratique, économique dans chaque pays. Maintenant, une fois que ce constat est fait, il faut qu'il y ait une véritable volonté politique du pays pour mettre en œuvre les constats qui ont été faits. Et c'est là que, je dirais, le bas blesse, parce que ça n'a pas été toujours bien pris en compte par un certain nombre de pays pour le faire avancer. Donc, c'est pour dire que, à ce niveau, nous sommes tout à fait d'accord avec lui qu'il y a un problème de redevabilité par rapport, évidemment, au financement que nous recevons et à la nécessité de faire en sorte que ça arrive là où ça doit arriver. Il y a un problème également de bonne gouvernance que l'Afrique également doit mettre en place pour également mériter la confiance qu'on doit placer justement aux différents élus qui sont élus par le peuple justement pour améliorer les conditions d'existence et de vie de ces populations-là. Concernant la question sécuritaire qui a été posée donc par ma compatriote, je dirais que c'est une question qui est certainement préoccupante et c'est la principale question qui nous préoccupe dans la sous-région du Sahel. Et nous avons déjà souligné que ce problème que nous vivons est né également de la mauvaise résolution du problème libyen, qui a créé une situation telle qu'aujourd'hui, des forces rétrogrades telles que les forces d'Al-Qaïda tentent de s'implanter dans le Sahel, dans les différents pays que nous avons, entraînant en même temps des populations qui sont des populations nomades qui vivent au nord de nos pays et qui vivent dans des conditions difficiles, qui sont un terreau fertile dans lequel il est possible de recruter évidemment des gens et de les entraîner donc dans des actes terroristes. C'est vrai que le Burkina Faso, ces derniers temps, a été l'objet d'attaques massives, mais je voudrais dire simplement et rassurer que autant la lutte contre le terrorisme, comme nous l'avons dit, ça sera une lutte de longue haleine, autant je voudrais dire qu'en tout état de cause, nous prenons les dispositions pour résolument, aussi bien à notre niveau qu'au niveau du G5 Sahel, travailler à éradiquer ce fléau-là dans notre sous-région. Parce que c'est là important, nous avons des frontières qui sont poreuses et évidemment, dans un sens ou dans l'autre, les terroristes en font donc leur chou gras parce que soit ils se replient au Burkina Faso après avoir attaqué le Mali, ou ils attaquent chez nous et se replient au Mali. Donc on a un problème évidemment du déploiement de la force du G5 Sahel et comme je l'ai dit, autant l'Union européenne pour les 50 millions dont elle a toujours poussé maintenant à l'ordre du jour, tout se passe normalement pour les premiers 50 millions que nous avons eus. Et nous avons toujours insisté pour qu'au niveau des autres pays qui ont pris des engagements, on puisse également mettre la pression pour permettre à ce que véritablement la force du G5 puisse se mettre en place et assurer les missions donc, que nous voulions lui confier dans le sens de la lutte contre le terrorisme. Donc voilà ce que je voulais dire. C'est vrai que c'est une préoccupation, mais je voulais dire également que le peuple burkinabé, indépendamment de ça, a montré également que, nonobstant ces attaques terroristes, il faut continuer à vivre, il faut avoir de la résilience, et c'est pourquoi nous avons, ces derniers jours, constaté qu'un certain nombre de manifestations importantes ont été organisées, que ce soit les CIAO, que ce soit les récréatales, que ce soit également des activités sportives telles que le Tour du Faso, dans une ambiance où il y a une grande mobilisation qui montre bien qu'il y a une résilience du peuple burkinabé par rapport à ces situations-là. Mais ça ne nous empêche pas de continuer à lutter effectivement pour en assurer la sécurité. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks so much, President Caboret. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et now we turn to Federica. Cara Federica, what do you think about your questions?
Premièrement, je voudrais dire qu'évidemment, c'est difficile d'aller au-delà de la question migratoire parce que je constate que les deux questions que j'ai reçues sont, en tout cas, concernant la question migratoire. Et je voudrais dire un mot sur ce que le Président vient de dire. Ce n'est pas par hasard que, juste maintenant, après notre rencontre ici, le Président et moi-même, nous allons avoir un échange à nouveau. On se voit souvent, heureusement. Et un des thèmes, une des questions qu'on va discuter, c'est notamment le soutien de l'Union européenne à la sécurité du pays, à la sécurité de la région. Notre soutien convaincu est déjà déployé avec 100 millions d'euros à la force conjointe du G5 Sahel et la façon dans laquelle nous pouvons, comme le Président a bien dit, encourager des autres pays, des autres organisations à faire la même chose. Parce que la question de la sécurité est fondamentale et il faut aller, comme on le dit dans le titre de cette rencontre, au-delà de la question migratoire seulement. Coming to my two questions, first of all, the situation in the Mediterranean. The reason why we have presence at sea as the European Union, you might know we have a military operation under EU flags with 25, if I'm not wrong, member states participating into that since 2015, is exactly to save people at sea, to fight trafficker networks. We have, in the last 3 years or so, 400,000 people have been rescued at sea. While 4 or 5 years ago, before this commission started, this was not considered a European issue at all. Every single person that dies is too much. But finally, we've started to do something on that with some results. It is true, as you say. The paradox that we're seeing today is that the less arrivals we see, the more this seems to become a politically divisive issue. But arrivals on the Italian coast are down by 85% now, and it's rather Spain that is facing the pressure today. This to say that we have, especially as this group, we have to pass a clear message of what is the reality and what is the political use of a phenomenon. And we have to be careful on not using people's lives for political propaganda. We will continue to save lives at sea. We will continue also to, and mainly, to save lives from the traffickers, the criminal networks, which means also saving lives in Libya, saving lives in the desert, because we see the people that are dying in the Mediterranean Sea, but we don't see the people dying in the Sahel. We have to act also there. And this is why the partnership with the African countries is so important, because the work that we can do in the countries of transit can be done only together. At sea, we can do our part. But inside Africa, at land, we can only work together. And this is linked to the reinforcement of the security in the Sahel. Imagine controlling a territory like that, a desert, with borders that are not even visible. It requires an expertise, means, money, resources, determination that is definitely complicated to achieve, even for Europeans. So we need a partnership there. And we need a partnership based on the respect of human rights. And here I come to the second question. Human rights abuses, well, the first one is the one the traffickers are doing. And this is why we're fighting the traffickers' networks. Not only because it's feeding into criminal organizations and financing of criminal networks, but also and mainly because respect of human life starts with the fighting of the traffickers' networks. This is why we have worked in this last 3 years with the countries south of Libya. Niger is the case in point, but also others, to tackle the issue of human rights abuses before people enter into Libya, because inside Libya, as we know, it's much more difficult to operate. And this has proven to work to an extent possible in complicated circumstances. We need to increase that. But today, for instance, in Agadez, we have an IOM center, and IOM and UNHCR center that is financed by the European Union that is working. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when I was visiting Agadez, it was not operational. Today it is. It's still a drop in the ocean, but still, we're going in the right direction. And this is why we are working together with the UN agencies, IOM, UNHCR, with the international organizations inside Libya to help fighting human rights abuses. When we started, I remember perfectly well, we had meetings with the IOM leadership, with UNHCR leadership, and they were not present in Libya at the time. Now they are there, thanks to our joint support with this joint work, European Union, UN, African Union. And this is starting to bring some results. It's a long, long, long way to go, but I think we finally got the right direction. And this is why it's so important that we sustain this work with money. You mentioned the issue of funds. The European Union budget is providing a lot of resources for this work, with the only aim of dismantling the networks of criminals, protecting lives, and also offering opportunities in the countries of origin and also of legal access to Europe. This seems to be a political taboo, but I think that if it's not our political family to push for that, it will not be on the agenda. It is on the agenda, because otherwise it is not sustainable. And I say this before our African friends say this. It is a must. And I would never stop saying, even if this costs a lot in Europe politically, Europe needs migration. But it needs regular, controlled, managed migration, as well as Africa needs managed migration, because otherwise it becomes a brain drain and a risk for people's lives. We are investing a lot, also in terms of resources. We need member states of the European Union to be consistent, because the money so far is coming mainly from the EU budget. Member states ask for projects to be done in Africa and then don't put the money on it. So I shouldn't say that, because I also speak on behalf of member states, but I'm always sincere, and you know me. We need member states to be consistent, and when they say Africa is a priority, they have also to put money on that. And let me say one last thing. Many talk now about the need for a Marshall Plan for Africa. The money that the European Union and member states put on Africa on different sectors every year is 20 billion euros, every single year. I would call it more than a Marshall Plan. By the way, let's stop referring to an American plan, let's call it a European plan for Africa. It's already in place, not even for Africa, with Africa, because we're doing that together. It's in place, but we have to tackle the governance issue, transparency, make sure that the funds reach the places where they have to be, and the sustainability of projects, and making sure that they reach exactly the places, the projects, the people that are the targets of these policies. I think we're on a good track. We simply need to keep the consistency of the work, more resources, and more partnership among us.
Mille grazie, Federica. We know you, and we know that you keep on fighting with all your strength for human rights and sustainable development. Keep strong.
I will.
Thanks very much. I would like now to invite Elena to take my place and to lead us on the second panel.
On va essayer de commencer, s'il vous plaît. Merci. Oui, les colliers. Où ça? Il doit venir ici. Il n'est pas là. Comme vous savez, vous avez l'interprétation à l'anglais ou au français. Je vais utiliser le français pour ma part. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue à tout le public qui nous accompagne et à nos invités surtout. Merci d'être ici. Je vais passer très vite à la présentation de notre premier speaker, de notre professeur qui fera la leçon magistrale, disons, cet après-midi, parce que nous n'avons pas trop de temps. Surtout, lui n'a pas trop de temps, même s'il a essayé de retarder un peu sa sortie, il doit partir assez tôt. Alors, je vous présente M. Paul Collier, professeur d'économie et de politique publique, auteur d'ouvrages très importants, à très grand succès, tels que The Bottom Billion. Il a été directeur du département de développement de la Banque mondiale et il est très connu aussi pour avoir encouragé des recherches de haut niveau sur le changement des politiques en Afrique. Nous avons déjà eu le plaisir de recevoir le professeur à 2 reprises comme groupe socialiste lors de l'initiative Together de l'année dernière à Bruxelles et à l'occasion de l'une de nos éditions de l'École de la démocratie en Italie. Je souhaite aussi la bienvenue au professeur Kiari Mohamed, professeur à l'Université de technologie de Yola, dans le nord-est de Nigeria, région malheureusement touchée gravement dans les dernières années par la présence des terroristes de Boko Haram. Madame la députée au Parlement du Niger, Nana Fassouma, Monsieur Apollos Noifort, directeur panafricain de l'organisation Oxfam, et à mes collègues Linda McAvan et plus tard Tania Fayon qui fera les conclusions. Je salue aussi, je crois que le professeur Collier doit savoir, les jeunes, 25 jeunes africains et européens qui sont en train de participer à notre Semaine Afrique et qui ont présenté un document au groupe socialiste avec leur vision, leurs revendications, leurs propositions pour l'avenir de leur continent. Des suggestions très intéressantes, très politiques, je dirais. Nous avons décidé dès le début de ce mandat de placer le partenariat Afrique-Europe au centre de notre débat politique, au premier plan, parce que nous aimerions, nous voulons, nous demandons d'ouvrir un nouveau chapitre des relations entre l'Afrique et l'Union européenne. Comme vous avez déjà écouté la haute représentante, c'est absolument une des priorités de l'Union européenne, surtout des progressistes de l'Union européenne. Dans un monde où les Trump, Salvini, Orban, Poutine ou Bolsonaro se font présents et sont des représentants du défi à la démocratie, au pluralisme, au monde ouvert que les progressistes représentons, il faut absolument travailler ensemble pour résister et pour avoir la possibilité d'élargir notre présence, nos valeurs partagées. C'est une nécessité, je crois, que les progressistes africains et les progressistes européens, nous travaillons ensemble. Les jeunes leaders qui sont ici et qui ont travaillé pendant ces jours ensemble aussi sont un excellent témoin de cette énorme potentialité que la coopération très ouverte, très sincère, très égalitaire entre jeunes Africains et jeunes Européens et jeunes de la diaspora peut produire. Et c'est un exemple que nous allons garder très près de notre agenda et de notre cœur. Je passe tout de suite la parole au professeur Collier pour qu'il puisse nous illustrer avec son expérience et ses propositions. On voudrait parler du futur aujourd'hui. Et je crois que le professeur Collier est un excellent protagoniste de cette idée. Merci beaucoup à tous. Vous avez la parole, professeur.
Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me back. And I so commend the Socialist and Democratic group for holding this Africa Week. It's so important to get Africa firmly on Europe's agenda. I also commend this concept of beyond migration. It is a disgrace that Europe, having finally noticed Africa, merely notices migration. Migration is a symptom of a big problem. It's not the solution to the problem. It's a symptom. And the problem is that Africa has got to catch up. Africa's got to catch up with both Europe and the world economy. And Europe's role is to assist Africa in Africa's strategies for catching up. Europe cannot save Africa. Africa is going to save Africa. But Europe's role is the modest one, but still not an important one, of helping Africa. So, and I'm going to start with an apology, which is that I am going to leave in an hour's time. And those of you, and I know a lot of the young people here have read The Bottom Billion, which it fills somebody like me with energy to discover that what you've written actually people have read, and but you might have noticed that the Bottom Billion was dedicated to someone called Daniel. Daniel's my son. He was a little boy, and I said, it's Daniel's future. What happens to Africa will determine Daniel's future. Daniel's 18 today. Today he becomes a man. He is a man. And before midnight tonight, I better be home to say, happy birthday, Daniel. So forgive me, but in an hour's time, I'm going to rush to the station to try and get home. My message is a start simple, but then get specific. And the simple message is that we've got to make globalization can be a great economic force for mass prosperity, but it isn't automatically. We've got to make globalization work for people, whereas at the moment, people are working for globalization. And that's the big concept in which I want to sort of nest what I have to say. Market forces. I'm an economist, right? I do economics plus, but at heart, my training is economics. And speaking as an economist, let me tell you, market forces concentrate the opportunities for productive work in a relatively few places. The economic concept is agglomeration. And the last 40 years, it's worked very, very powerfully, both within continents and between them. And so it's increasingly clustered productive employment opportunities in a relatively few big cities, in a relatively few countries and regions. Now, you can see this happening within Europe. You know, It's Frankfurt, it's Berlin, it's Paris, it's London, it's Milan, it's Brussels. There's a lot of parts within Europe that actually are at the wrong end of those forces of economic agglomeration. But at the moment, and for the last 40 years, those powerful, increasingly powerful forces have been working against Africa. And so bright young Africans have tried to get to where these productive opportunities are. Very understandably. And many of them have drowned in the process of trying. There's no harm to Europe in that process of bright young Africans coming to work in Africa, in the opportunities generated in Europe's agglomerations. But there's real harm to Africa. There's real harm to Africa. A drain of Africa's brightest and best, a hemorrhage of Africa's brightest and best to Europe is not in Africa's interest. Africa does have an interest in continued migration to Europe, but the most helpful migration for Africa is actually a form of circular migration. I've every year got loads of African students, and they study, maybe they work for a couple of years, and then hopefully they go back to Africa, right? Sometimes at the moment they're pretty reluctant, I should say. Right? The Chinese students all go back to China because they know the future's China. And a lot of the African students are at the moment worried, where's the opportunities in Africa? You know? And they're worried for good reason. But then Europe's got to help Africa do something about that. I mean, let me give you a practical example. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Ghana. Very well-run country now, Ghana. It's a long period of continuous democracy. Last year it grew at 8%, the economy. It's doing really well. But of course, there's nothing that the government of Ghana can do which negates the fact that a bright young guy who moves from Ghana to Europe will be a lot better off than being in Ghana. Right? But actually that young guy needs to be persuaded your future's in Ghana. Right? Africa needs productive jobs, and the question is how to get them. And now let me turn to what Europe could do better in ensuring that Africa and the governments like the government of Ghana, which are really trying hard, can actually generate these productive jobs. So I'm going to have 5 practical suggestions. And I'm going to start with infrastructure. Productive jobs are generated on a base of good transport connectivity and good supply of electricity. If you haven't got good transport connectivity and you haven't got reliable electricity, you're not at the starting gate for productive jobs. Right? Because productive jobs happen in firms, and firms need electricity, and they need to be able to bring stuff in and move it out, and that's the transport stuff. And Africa's had very, very inadequate transport infrastructure and electricity infrastructure. Desperately inadequate, still has. And it's got better the last 10 years, but not, I'm afraid, thanks to Europe. We know who's helped to provide the transport and energy infrastructure in Africa. It's China. And it's no good Europe leaving it all to China. Right? Europe is 80% of the world's aid programs. They're financed from Europe, either directly through the European Commission or through the bilateral programs. And yet we've basically sat on our hands whilst China's financed the infrastructure. And that needs to stop, because without the infrastructure, Africa cannot generate jobs. And China may well now be running out of steam a bit. And the Chinese model of infrastructure for Africa was a pretty unattractive model. You know? It was infrastructure in return for a natural resource grab. It was described as mutual benefit, and I've actually nothing against mutual benefit. I think mutual benefit, when it's genuinely mutual benefit, is dignified, and it gives both sides an incentive to complete the deal, you know, to stick to the deal. But of course, what China actually meant by mutual benefit was, we'll look after our side, you better look after your side. And African governments were so used to the sort of benign approach of a lot of European governments that they didn't take that sufficiently seriously. In fact, just as an aside, I sent my son Daniel over the summer to work. He wants to become an architect. So I sent him as an intern in an African architect firm. And the African architect, their job was to supervise the construction of a building, and the construction company that they were supervising was a Chinese construction company. And so Daniel came back with the most horrific stories. They'd have been funny, except that they were horrific. Because who were these Chinese construction supposedly experts? Well, they'd been released from prison in China, and the deal was work for 3 years on a construction site in Africa, and then your 10-year sentence will be up. And these guys had not got a single clue how to build the building they were supposed to build. And so they weren't building it. If it hadn't been for these African architects supervising, something would have gone up, the money would have been handed over, and the building would then have come down again. Right? So that's the reality of China and Africa. It's not very nice, but somebody's got to do the infrastructure. And Europe better step up to that. Secondly, trade. You know, we need to think beyond what was laughably called the economic partnership agreements. They were economic. They weren't really partnerships, and they most certainly weren't agreements. Right? That's why they took 10 years of argument. So this was sort of Orwellian language, really. And what Europe was insisting on was that that Africa open up free trade, open up trade to Europe in return for Europe opening up trade for Africa. And we shouldn't have been insisting on that. The very simple thing we should have been asking was, if we open up to you, we'll do that as long as you open up to each other. We should have been a force encouraging integration, economic integration in Africa, because that was, after all, the spirit of the European community. Was what was it about? It was about opening up trade within Europe, right? And so, reciprocity, fine, but not reciprocity with us. There's all sorts of reasons why Africa might still want to protect itself from imports from Europe. Right? But Africa shouldn't protect itself from Africa. And so we should have been a force encouraging trade integration in the continent. And fortunately, I'm going through a lot of mistakes, but fortunately, there's a lot of the future left. Right? More for you than for me. But we should use this future. Right? Let's get it right now. So we can do better on infrastructure, we can do better on trade. Third, there's things called development finance institutions. They are the public sector agencies which provide public money to help firms to go to other countries. So European Community has one, it's called the European Investment Bank, and there's another European Development Bank, which is called the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And that is a very competent institution, EBRD. It was used to regenerate the economies of Eastern Europe. That job's substantially done. And so EBRD then started to look at the Middle East and North Africa, and so it's already operating in North Africa. But the big opportunity for EBRD, and its president of the EBRD saw this opportunity, the big opportunity is for EBRD to go and use its enormous skill set and money in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's what the president proposed to do. And the board, which is made up entirely of delegates appointed by European governments, the board has just vetoed it. Right? This is the left hand of Europe not knowing what the right hand is doing. Right? It's really foolish. And a pan-European organization like the Socialists and Democrats, which is represented across Europe, can do something about this. The European government delegates who voted this down didn't do it for any big knowledge of Africa. They knew nothing about Africa. They just said no, right? Don't expand. Mission creep and all that sort of stuff, right? It's a very important mission that the president wants to fulfill. Africa needs organizations like European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. It's very, very short of decent firms. And EBRD and the other development finance institutions can use their money to bring firms to the countries where they are most needed. Right? A proper firm in a poor country performs a miracle of productivity because it harnesses people's capacities by doing economies of scale and economies of specialization. 2/3 of Africa's human capital works solo, works on its own, right? No scale, no specialization, doomed to low productivity. Right? So even Africa's stock of educated people cannot at the moment be very productive because they're not working together with other people, with other workers in a firm. So that's my third suggestion, is get both the European Investment Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development to really scale up in Africa. They're exactly the institutions that are needed. In fact, in February, I'm convening all the development finance institutions in the world together in Oxford to try and give them this message, scale up in Africa. Fourth, now we heard it from the young woman from Burkina Faso, the very good pointed question about security provision in Burkina And this is a challenge that, as the President implied, really, the territory of Burkina Faso is huge relative to the revenues that the Burkina Faso has. You know, to actually provide security against private organizations of predatory violence, which is what you've got in the Sahel, to actually provide effective security requires a really very big army. You know, if we just take one example, Algeria. Algeria did manage to face down the violent organized groups, but it took an army of 500,000 men. There's no way that Burkina Faso could afford an army of 500,000 men. Now, at the moment, who's trying to keep the peace in Burkina Faso? The UN. There's a UN Blue Helmet army, except it isn't an army, right? It's forces from 29 different countries, and it hasn't got proper rules of engagement. It costs a heap, right? It costs over €1 billion a year, that UN force, and it's not effective. Right? Meanwhile, what is needed? What is needed? Well, if we go just across to Mali, there's a big French force in Mali. When the French force arrived in Mali, just in time, the French troops were greeted in the streets as heroes. Now, they've very understandably overstayed their welcome. They've pelted with stones. Go away, right? That's very understandable, right? Who wants a load of foreign army stationed permanently in your country, right? So obviously what the Sahel needs is its own regional security force. And it would need to be pretty big. And it's going to be pretty expensive. And the countries of the Sahel are too poor to pay for it. So this is the $1 billion that we're paying the UN, we should be paying to the local regional security force. Right? At the moment, we're not allowed to use aid to help domestic security forces. The UN, the money we give to the UN ticks a box of that's aid, but if we gave the money to a regional security force actually run by African governments, it wouldn't tick the box of aid, right? That's actually rather stupid if you think about it, right? No, that is why, I mean, the answer to your question, why is there a security problem in Burkina Faso, is that, right? That Europe's got really stupid funding rules for the provision of security in the Sahel. Right? We're spending very big money through the UN. It doesn't work. It can't possibly work. We're spending very big money through France being in Mali. It's not working anymore. These things work for a year or two, but that just buys you the time to do something sensible, which is build a regional security force. Right? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then finally, an overarching thing. Every few years, the donors all meet together with governments. The donors meet together, the donors meet together with governments, and the governments say, stop telling us what to do. And so the donors say, absolutely, they say, what we want is ownership, not donorship. And they issue a declaration. And it all sounds wonderful. And then what happens at the country level is business as usual. Huh? In fact, business as usual gets worse and worse and worse, so that there's more and more conditionality. You've got to do this project and this policy, so that the donors are trying to set policy in African countries. And let me give you the, I'm a friend of President Obasanjo, who was a very fine African president, a great man, and is still hard at work. Over 80, still hard at work. And he recounts this. He said, when the World Bank and the IMF used to come to Abuja, to Nigeria, I used to assemble my ministers, and I'd say to them, look, IMF, World Bank, all the other donors, they're really ever so important to us. So never, never disagree with what they tell you. And then there was a little pause. And then he said, and then I told my ministers, but never actually do what they'd say. Right? Now, if you think about it for a moment, that is actually a truly dysfunctional situation where, and he's a good president. Nigeria under Obasanjo was a really rapidly reforming country, but he was having to pretend to do one set of things and then try and get the government to actually not do what it was pretending to do. All this in a country with very weak government capacity. If any government tried to do that, announce one set of things publicly and then undo them privately, it wouldn't work. But in a state which has got a very weak government and is just trying to build it up, it's really dysfunctional. Right? So, we should actually walk the talk. We should not aspire to set the policies in African governments. First of all, even if they did the policies, it would be a disgraceful thing to do because governments would no longer be accountable to their citizens. They'd be accountable to donors, which would be a complete denial of the democratic process. And if instead what they're doing is what Obasanjo says, they pretend to do them and then undermine them, the result is just chaotic. So, we need to let governments set policies. Sometimes they'll set policies we don't agree with, and sometimes we'll be right. They won't be good policies. But governments and societies will learn. That's how everybody learns. It's a process of social learning. Sometimes you learn from mistakes. That is okay. Right? It's much better than having father always telling you what to do. So that's my agenda. 4 very practical things, starting with infrastructure, ending with security, and then this overarching message of stop telling Africa what to do. Thank you very much.
Alors, merci beaucoup, professeur Collier. Je vais passer maintenant la parole à nos jeunes leaders ici présents. Pour commencer, Anita Knirote de Kenya. Elle a la parole. Quelque chose qui ne va pas avec les...
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Collier. And my question is, I'm glad you talked about the need for infrastructure and ownership and how China is coming in, especially since in the wake of the Beijing conference where almost all presidents of Africa went to China. My question is, in the end, who will bail out Africa? I'll give a key example of Zambia and Kenya. Just recently, there were rumors. Okay, Africans, and I believe I speak for most of who we are here, we don't know what deals the government is entering with China. Nobody knows. It's maybe we'll find out in the successive governments. I feel like in the end, somebody must bail out China, and who is this person? Someone must bail out Africa, and who is this person? In Kenya, we have the SGR, that's the standard gauge railway running from Mombasa to Nairobi, and in the public partnership agreement, it's being run by Chinese in terms of jobs. So it seems a bit unfair from our side, because simple jobs like ticketing are being done by the Chinese, and then there are issues of environmental degradation, and of course the SGR is passing through the railway. So once in a while we get a few wild animals being killed. So in the end, if we do the math, we are paying almost $1 billion Kenya shillings. That's about 100,000 euros to the Chinese. So it looks a bit like, though it looked as an open deal, it really is not a good deal, and we are in the bad side of the deal. For Zambia, it's their power company that's up for grabs. For Kenya, if we don't pay, it's our airport and one of the ports, Mombasa port. So in the end, who will speak for Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I take another question from Lorenzo Arminati from Italy.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make a question. At the start of your speech, you said that globalization is now working for people, while people are working for globalization. Now, let me just come to a very hot topic here in Europe, so migration. Since the start of the so-called migration crisis, we have seen fear towards migrants arising in all Europe. Do you think this fear might be linked with economic insecurity that more and more European citizens have faced in the last 20 years because of globalization? What can be done in order to make globalization working both for African people, because we have to remember that many of those young people leaving Africa are leaving Africa also because of some processes embedded into globalization, and also in order to reduce the fear that spread in all Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mary Emmanuel from Nigeria.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I just want to ask a question based on what Collier ended with. Stop telling Africa what to do. Hoping that we would learn from our mistakes and learn by ourselves. But what we see is that we're not really learning from our mistakes, at least not in the pace that we want to see. We were hoping for change with a change in administration, hoping that things would get better, but what we see is the opposite of what we want. Impunity still reigns, corruption. I'm very, very glad you spoke about China, because what we see, some of the stories are highly, really ridiculous. And these people prefer to do deals in Nigeria because of how corruption, the corrupt officials and people who deal with them. So do you think this is what you're suggesting is good for us, leaving us to continue making mistakes, to learn by ourselves? And how long would we keep repeating this circle?
Thank you. Tebayang Emmanuel from Uganda.
Thank you very much, Korea, for the overarching message. Stop telling Africa what to do. I hope you are referring to governments. Who will tell governments in Africa what to do? The people are telling governments what they wish. The same deal you've given about the negotiations with private sector or investments is what governments are having in Africa with their people. They actually listen to what we tell them, and they go and do something else different. As an economist, I want to also get your view about livelihoods in Africa. Investments in Africa are taking away some of the livelihoods that feed the population. And in Europe, there are also investments that support migration away from these livelihoods, particularly the keeping of livestock in a traditional system called pastoralism. What's your view as an economist in order to feed the population by 2050? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor, when you're ready.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for a lot of good questions. So first, the young woman from Kenya, and the opaque form of Chinese deals. And indeed, also the use of Chinese workers, which is ridiculous. Ridiculous in a continent where you've got so many young people without proper jobs, and you're providing jobs for young Chinese when China's youth population is absolutely falling. So it's just ridiculous. This is something where you need to organize to demand transparency on these deals. I've got one word of comfort, which is something that Europe discovered about 20 years ago. And let me suggest, sort of, suppose you owed me €1. That would be your problem. Suppose you owe me €10 million. Actually, that's my problem, right? And I think China is going to find itself in that sort of position. A very foolish creditor who lends on exploitative terms and opaque terms, and then finds that the government is not in a position to pay back. It's not in a very strong position when you think about it, especially because there's a club of creditors. It's called the Paris Club. But China isn't in it. So do you think the other creditors will say, oh, well, we'll lend Africa more money in order to pay back these debts that you've got to China? It doesn't sound plausible somehow, does it? Right? So what African governments need to be sort of persuaded to do is stand up to China and say, actually, these turn out to be such lousy deals that you're going to have to reschedule these debts, right? Is the polite term for it, right? So in that sense, I'm a little bit less worried than I otherwise would be. Right? Now, the Chinese are not stupid, and so they've put sort of legal claims on quite a lot of natural resources, and that is a problem. Right? But quite often you'll have some wiggle room. And of course the Chinese, in the end, won't want to look like complete shits in Africa, right? Sorry, that was a technical economics term. And so they can kind of be shamed into behaving a bit better, I think. Right? But you have to do it yourselves. I mean, this is something that literally Europe, it can make some noise about transparency, but kind of you need to be demanding it. The young guy from Italy, and the fear of the host population towards the migrants, and I mean, as you implied, in Italy, there's 30% youth unemployment in Italy amongst young Italians. This is something has gone very, very badly wrong in the management of a lot of European economies, right, that produces that. Very badly wrong. Right? And so the right people to blame for 30% unemployment amongst Italian youth are not young Africans, obviously, right? Obviously not, right? But you're right to think somebody better take the blame, right? It's in a very abnormal state for a European economy to be in. We last saw this sort of rate of unemployment in the 1930s, and we learned how to do something about it, you know? That's why Keynesian economics was invented, right? So this is really bad. I promised myself, I've just written a new book, and I disciplined myself that I must not under any circumstances advertise it, so I didn't bring it. But your question is directly answered in my new book, which is called The Future of Capitalism. You asked, how do we make capitalism work for ordinary people? The Future of Capitalism, subtitle, Facing the New Anxieties, is exactly about that. Right? So I didn't mean to... The third question was from the young Nigerian, who quite properly questioned the power of what's called social learning, because it's clearly not happening in Nigeria. Right? But what's happening now in Nigeria, tragically actually demonstrates how damaging this policy conditionality is, because President Buhari is actually repeating history in a most bizarre way. He was last president in 1984 to 86. And what happened in 1986 was the world oil price collapsed. And policies have been so poor that Nigeria was utterly unprepared for that fall in oil prices. And indeed, it had been compounded by the fact that there'd been a lot of borrowing. And so by 1986, Nigeria had huge debts and a big fiscal deficit, and suddenly there was no oil money. And so terrible policy, terrible history of policies. And then along comes the IMF and World Bank and they say, goodness, you're in a mess. We'll lend you some money to soften it, but you've got to do these policies, right? And the result was a lot of misery, not actually because of the policies. There was a lot of misery because no matter how much money the IMF and the World Bank lent, you'd been living way above your sustainable level with very high oil prices that collapsed and a load of debt, and all that game ended. Right? But because the World Bank the IMF was saying, you've got to do this and you've got to do that, people naturally, suddenly there was all this pain, and they said, oh, it's because of what these guys are making us do. And so people learnt the good times were those policies that we had in the early 1980s. That's when we lived well. We should go back to that. Now, it's the policies that you had in the early 1980s that were the cause of the whole problem. Right? So that was very mistaken social learning, which is now playing out all over again, because that's what Buhari learnt in 1986. And he's president again, and they've got the same problems. You've got a lot of debt, and you've got a fall in the oil price. And he's learned all the wrong things. And it's a tragedy, because like you, when he came in, I thought, oh, this is hopeful. And it isn't. You know? Now, there is stuff here that Europe can do. Because here, in that battle against corruption, Europe can play a much bigger role. I got involved in this when the British had the G8 in 2013, and I was called in to advise the British government on what should be the agenda. And I'm completely non-political, but I said the agenda should be you should make it much easier to tax natural resource companies. You should make it much harder for companies to escape taxation by moving profits around. And London is the epicenter, London lawyers are the epicenter of what's called shell companies, where people hide corrupt money and put them in the Cayman Islands, in a numbered bank account with a company that you don't know who owns the company. And so I persuaded the British government that that should be their agenda. And to the astonishment of the British civil service, that's what the Prime Minister, David Cameron, agreed to. And so that became the G8 agenda. So we got Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, we got a compulsory public register of the true ownership of all the companies in Britain. And we got the first efforts by the OECD to combat what's called base erosion and profits shifting. And that's the agenda that the European Parliament needs to take forward. The European Parliament's already done some things. 5 G8 governments signed up to the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, and the European Parliament passed some very helpful legislation there. But there's a lot more than Europe can do to close down these ways in which corrupt money is hidden. Final question was about livelihoods in Africa. And you started talking about pastoralism, which I think is just genuinely really difficult. But then you moved on to the big question of, in 2050, what's things going to look like? And there I can give you an answer. It's not about pastoralism. Between now and 2050, Africa's urban population will triple. Triple. Right? So, think of the typical African city now. Lagos, right? Nairobi. You're thinking Nairobi, you're thinking Lagos, Think of your big city. And then think, by 2050, it's going to be 3 times bigger. So 2/3 of that city is not yet built. Right? Now that's very good news, because the third that is built doesn't work very well. Right? And so the #1 agenda for Africa, in my view, is to make the next 2/3 of Africa's cities, the stuff that'll get built between now and 2050, much more functional than the stuff that's there at the moment. The proportion of urban households in Africa that get piped water has been falling the last 25 years. I'm just going to Harare in December, and I'm going to have to get a cholera shot first, because there's cholera. This is the 21st century. It's absurd that cities have got cholera in the 21st century, right? This is a mid-19th century disease that we got rid of through basic things like keeping a public water supply clean, right? So there's a lot that needs to be done. If Africa can build functional cities, those cities, because they're functional, will generate a lot of jobs. That's where the jobs will be, because by 2050, most Africans will be in those cities. And if they're functional, there'll be productive jobs. That's what cities do. Right? But if they're mega-slums, congested mega-slums, they won't support productive jobs. And so if I have to pick one thing, it's over the next 30 years, make African urbanization work. Because of that, I'm an old guy, so I know I've only got sort of one last big public policy initiative in me. So I've chosen cities. So I've got a program called Cities That Work. And if you just Google cities that work, you'll get all the material that we've got. We're working with African mayors to try and make the future of cities better than the present reality of cities. So anybody want to support us on Cities That Work or use that material, you're welcome. Right? Sorry, that was a shameless pitch. I've done. Yeah.
Je passe tout de suite la parole à M. Apollos Mafor, directeur panafricain de l'organisation Oxfam. Merci.
Right. Hi, everyone. Yeah, good. I think for the next maybe 6 to 8 minutes, I'll just sort of build on what the others have said. The HRVP Federica, and of course, you know, when His Excellency, the President of Burkina Faso spoke. I think just to ensure that we are clear, you know, this is looking at the issues around migration. And a lot has been said from the economic point of view and also from, of course, the other issues related to migration, from conflict to security to the economy and, of course, to people's lives. I think, first of all, what's important is for us to understand that the approach to migration has been narrow-minded and has not, in the real sense of things, led to improving people's lives. It has been treated as a threat to the EU member states, rather than as an opportunity for a win-win situation between the EU and Africa. I think that's the first thing we need to understand. And if you understand the design and the implementation of the trust fund, as well as, you know, the discussions around the Valletta process, you would see that it was meant to actually stop migration in the interest of the member states, rather than, you know, creating opportunities for both continents. The second thing about that is the fact that we need to see that the approach has been short-term and taken in humanitarian situation, rather than looking at it from a long-term sustainable development solution. And that's a critical flaw in that process and in that instrument. A third issue is the fact that it's been securitized. So, you know, issues around treating it as a security issue, stopping people, funding the military to stop people from crossing the borders and all that has not helped, but has rather perpetuated issues around trafficking, violence against women and girls, you know, mistreatment and violation of human rights. And that has rather led to more deaths, you know, and more violations rather than helped the young African people who have been migrating. But let's not also forget that as much as these things are happening, there are broader root causes that we need to deal with. Some of them Paul had talked about in his discussions around the economics around it, you know, African countries not creating opportunities. But we need to see migration as an opportunity. 80% of migration that happens is within the African continent. It's only about 20% that's between the EU and Africa. And that means that we need to consider the economic value that migration adds to the development of Africa. Recently, the Continental Free Trade Agreement that the AU just passed, you know, and adopted, you know, creates opportunity for freedom of movement. I say to my colleagues back home in Africa that if I were to take my origin of country's passport to travel, I would need visa for at least 38 countries within the continent before I can travel. At least for 38, and sometimes 40. And then those of them who claim that they offer visas on arrival, they make it difficult. So I get into a country, and I show my passport, and they say, oh, you are African. I say, yes, I am African. So can I get in? They say, well, we need to check. So it's also our governments back home who are creating these problems. Yeah, it's not just an EU problem, and we need to rethink some of these things. So I said to myself, in fact, sometimes if you then take for example, your British passport, if you have dual citizenship, I know some of us do, you know, and you travel into Africa, you have easier access than with your African passport. And that's a critical challenge. So that means that something is fundamentally wrong with our governance, our processes, our integration, and the fact that we need to redesign programs and policies that support migration and the movement of people, and to ensure that we are passing across skills, you know, and talents. But I'll say this to us, that we have an opportunity to change this. I think some of the things that needs to happen are that we need to look beyond migration. And looking beyond migration means that we must tackle the root causes, not just the branches. I think the EUTF, as a fund or as an instrument, is tackling the branches and not the root causes. You do not provide a military solution to a problem. It only aggravates the issue. We must look at the long-term sustainable solutions. So, for example, the youth development programs needs to be mainstreamed. And it's not just about window dressing through funding. It's about actual co-ownership between our governments in Africa and the EU member states. It means that we must continue to consider that Africa has an agenda. I remember when I was with my colleagues in SOAS, you know, we were looking at several development agendas. And I said to them, one of the things that countries do is to give their citizens hope. And they give their citizens hope through, you hear of 10-year strategic plans, 5-year strategic plans, development agenda, but that's not happening. Sorry? How much time do I have left? 5? Okay. All right, so that's fine. So, for example, I don't know how many of us can clearly articulate Africa's development agenda, Agenda 2063. I go to meetings, people are able to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, but no one is talking about Agenda 2063. But that's Africa's roadmap to development. Even within our African countries, that's not happening. I'll say to us that we need local solutions to address the migration problem. We need to address migration as an opportunity and not a threat to the member states or to Africa. A third is that we need to consider that investments in people should be more sustainable and not short-term. We need to consider that the rights of migrants are people's rights. They are human rights, and they must be protected. We hear of in the transition camps where women are raped, girls are treated as slaves, young men are tied up as if they were animals. If you go to the butchery, you see where animals are tied up. That's how these young men, our youths, are tied up in those transition camps and treated less than human beings. That needs to change. And that needs to happen by redesigning and taking a much more a structured political approach to addressing the challenges. Some of the things we've talked about are the wider issues that our governments can tackle. So when Paul was saying no one should tell African governments what to do, that is actually very true. But what is also true is that there must be space for youth, for the voices of citizens, including youths and civil society, to shape policies and programs that will see long-term sustainable development. I'll stop there for now.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Voilà, il nous reste 30 et quelques minutes, 33, 34. Et donc, si on veut écouter encore quelques questions de la part de la salle, il faut des interventions un peu plus brèves. Donc, je vous passe la parole, Madame Nana Fassouma, pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. Bonjour à tout le monde. Je vais tenter de répondre à cette question, bien qu'elle est complexe. Complexe pourquoi? Parce que l'Afrique est confrontée à d'énormes défis, à d'énormes problèmes. Donc, si on ne tente pas de résoudre, je ne vois pas le développement de l'Afrique pour maintenant. Les problèmes tournent autour de une pauvreté entretenue, surtout par la croissance démographique, un environnement physique et écologique austère, une vulnérabilité chronique à l'insécurité alimentaire, une vulnérabilité également chronique, surtout pour ce qui est de la question de la paix et de la sécurité, et également une situation de sous-emploi, surtout des jeunes. Les jeunes africains ne migrent pas par plaisir. Ils migrent parce que c'est la situation qui est offerte à eux. Ils migrent parce qu'ils pensent que le plaisir est ailleurs et non dans leur pays. C'est pour dire que beaucoup des Africains, quand ils viennent en Europe, c'est à la recherche d'une vie meilleure. Je prends un exemple généralement que les jeunes Africains prennent. Quand tu vois un Africain migrer vers l'Europe et que cet Africain, on voit sa famille dans une maison en banco et à force d'envoyer des ressources chez lui, un jour, on voit que cette maison-là, qui est en banco, est devenue une maison en matériaux définitifs. Donc, ça tente nos jeunes, ça leur donne envie de migrer vers l'Europe parce qu'ils pensent que l'avenir est là-bas. Et hier, en venant ici, en prenant mon taxi, en venant au niveau de mon hôtel, j'ai vu un panneau où c'est écrit « L'avenir, c'est l'Europe ». Alors là, on est tenté de rester. Moi-même qui suis parlementaire, je suis tenté de rester parce que vous dites que l'avenir, c'est chez vous. Donc, pour ça, moi, je pense que si on veut changer les choses, il faut qu'il y ait véritablement un développement de l'Afrique à la base. Il ne s'agit pas de faire un développement de façon superficielle, mais il faut que la base au niveau de l'Afrique puisse bouger pour prétendre à un développement durable et sincère. C'est pour ça, moi, en termes de vision, quand on dit de vision, je proposerais d'abord qu'il y ait un partenariat sincère et durable entre l'Europe et l'Afrique. Un partenariat gagnant-gagnant. L'Afrique ne devrait plus être un réservoir de matières premières et un débouché de produits finis de l'Europe. Nous devrons également, l'Europe doit nous aider à industrialiser l'Afrique, à asseoir une bonne stratégie de développement à travers la promotion des investissements privés, l'industrialisation de l'Afrique, comme je l'ai dit, à travers le renforcement, le transfert de compétences et le transfert de technologies. Tout à l'heure, j'ai entendu le professeur dire qu'on ne doit plus utiliser la main-d'œuvre chinoise. Mais pourquoi on le fait en Afrique? C'est parce que nos jeunes ne sont pas compétents, ne sont pas qualifiés dans ce domaine. C'est pour ça, chaque fois, l'Afrique fait appel à d'autres compétences pour pouvoir venir réaliser certaines infrastructures. Et également, améliorer la gouvernance. Chaque fois, on dit d'améliorer la gouvernance en Afrique, mais moi, je dis que l'amélioration de la gouvernance, elle doit être mondiale et faire en sorte que les pays détenteurs de matières premières participent eux-mêmes à la fixation des prix. Le Niger est un grand producteur de l'uranium. Mais comment on fixe le prix de l'uranium? Le Niger ne prend pas part lors de la fixation du prix de l'uranium. Et on n'a pas également ces transferts de compétences et de technologies pour pouvoir également utiliser nos ressources naturelles. La preuve en est qu'au Niger, on a l'uranium, mais on a des coupures d'électricité intempestives qui sont là. Tout simplement parce qu'on ne sait pas comment utiliser ces ressources naturelles. Et on doit également mettre l'accent en place un mécanisme de migration organisé, structuré. Pourquoi je le dis? Parce que l'Europe a besoin de la main-d'œuvre. Et la main-d'œuvre provient généralement de l'Afrique. Les gouvernements africains, eux aussi, à leur tour, doivent beaucoup s'investir dans l'éducation, surtout l'éducation professionnelle des jeunes. Il nous faut des jeunes compétents, des jeunes qualifiés, et même si ces jeunes-là vont migrer vers l'Europe, on sait qu'on est en train de fournir à l'Europe des éléments de qualité, des éléments qualifiés. Nous devons également développer les nouvelles technologies de l'information. C'est vrai, ce n'est pas la première fois que je viens en Europe, mais quand je viens chaque fois, je suis émerveillée. Il suffit de toucher un bouton pour avoir le café ou le Lipton. Donc, c'est formidable. Il faut que également cette technologie soit développée au niveau de l'Afrique. Sinon, les Africains j'aimerais que les Africains ne soient plus des spectateurs du XXIe siècle, parce que ce qui est sûr, c'est les nouvelles technologies de l'information qui vont déterminer le développement de tout un pays. Donc, je m'arrêterai là, comme je n'ai pas beaucoup de temps, mais je tiens à mettre l'accent sur un aspect qui est très important, c'est le temps. En Afrique, on ne sait pas que le temps, comme le disent les Anglais, time is money. En Afrique, on ne le sait pas. On gaspille énormément notre temps. Hier, quand j'étais arrivée à l'aéroport, je pensais que j'allais trouver quelqu'un avec une pancarte pour dire pour m'accueillir à l'aéroport avec une pancarte. J'ai fait des allers-retours, je suis partie, je suis revenue, mais je n'ai vu personne. C'est après que je me suis renseignée que dans mon téléphone, j'ai toutes les informations qui vont me permettre d'arriver à mon hôtel. Donc, vous voyez, ce que je comprends en Europe, le temps, c'est de l'argent. Et quand on économise le temps, on peut également contribuer au développement d'un pays. Donc, l'Afrique a besoin d'un véritable programme de changement de mentalité. Parce que ce qui freine le développement en Afrique, ce n'est même pas les infrastructures, c'est la mentalité des Africains, la résistance au changement. Et je pense que si on arrive à changer les mentalités des Africains, si on arrive à inculquer des valeurs aux Africains, l'Africain peut être en mesure de se développer soi-même. Bien sûr, avec l'appui de l'Europe pour les transferts de compétences, les transferts de technologies. Je pense qu'avec tout ça, on peut y arriver à développer l'Afrique. J'ai toujours l'habitude de caricaturer. Quand vous prenez cette bouteille d'eau et ce verre, qu'est-ce que vous constatez? Qu'ils n'ont pas la même grandeur. Là, je qualifie cette bouteille de l'Europe et ce verre de l'Afrique. Donc, j'aimerais qu'avec l'appui de l'Europe, dans le cadre de transfert de compétences et de technologies, que l'Afrique, même si elle n'arrive pas à la hauteur de la bouteille, qu'elle arrive au moins aux 2/3 de la bouteille. Donc, c'est sur cette note d'espoir que je vais finir mon exposé.
Merci beaucoup. C'était très direct et très intéressant. Merci beaucoup. Je passe la parole au professeur Mohamed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me join my colleagues in thank you all for inviting us to speak, particularly on this important issue of Africa-Europe partnership. In spite of Paul Collier's reservations, I still think that there is some room for partnership, and development in which both continents can work closely. Africa, as you all know, has been described as the continent of the future, largely because of its potentials. Its population currently put at about 1.2 billion, mostly 60% of them young persons. And the UN estimates are that by about 2050, the population of Africa could double. So if these potentials are properly harnessed, of course, there is room for development. Now, this will require the political will of African governments at home and the support of Europe, particularly the European Union and other development partners. The major impediment to building a solid Africa-Europe partnership is a certain level of distrust by Africans based on a long history of colonial oppression and neo-colonial exploitation. That there cannot be a level playing field for the African continent in a partnership with Europe. The onus is first on the EU to dispel these fears, and secondly on African leaders to accept their responsibility to citizens and be futuristic rather than dwelling on the past. The EU, but especially the Socialist and Democrats group, seems to have keyed in to this proposition. The problems of Africa are the same with the problems of all developing societies: acute poverty, low human development indices, weak infrastructure, weak human capital development, poor indices on education, health, and the social empowerment of women and young persons. The economic growth, well, I don't have to bother about. Now, Africa's relation with Europe had been characterized as an unequal one, in which Europe played the role of master, while Africa remained the weaker party and not a partner. This dimension goes back to more than 500 years of contact, colonization, exploitation, and neo-colonial bondage. With the end of direct colonization and independence of most countries in the 1960s, independence led to the emergence of multilateral imperialism, in which new colonial masters, such as the US, also joined in. The emergence of the Bretton Woods system, the IMF and the World Bank, neoliberal policies of the IMF and the World Bank, especially the Structural Adjustment Program of the 1980s, further impoverished the continent, increased foreign debt, weakened the state in the hope of creating an enabling environment for the private sector to drive growth and development. The state retreated, and of course, the poor and the weak took the greatest portion. As at now, there seems to be some paradigm shift, particularly in the UN, particularly in the EU, with this vision for a Africa-Europe partnership. This, it is envisaged, will be done by boosting investments, supporting education and skills, and increasing trade and business. In spite, of course, of all the reservations raised by Paul Collier that it is not economic, it's not partnership, and it's not an agreement, but this is, for me, a very good starting point. The new EU partnership is to be based on the principle of shared responsibilities and ownership, which must go beyond the current obsession with migration. This should be done, in the words of the S&D, on the basis of sustainable development and inclusive growth that will leave no child, no woman, and no man behind. This strategy, if faithfully followed through, will address the underlying causes of irregular migration, prevent migrant and human trafficking, protect lives, and ease legal pathways to migration. Any initiative done with buy-in from Africa and in which Africans share ownership will most likely succeed. On the continental level, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement seeks to boost trade between the 55 member states by bringing them closer and removing the barriers to trade, issues that have already been raised by both Collier and Nwafo before me. Currently, trade between African states stands at only 10%. Once it comes into effect, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will be the biggest trade agreement since the WTO. Here again, Nigeria and South Africa, two of Africa's biggest economies, and 8 other states are yet to sign the African Free Continental Trade Agreement. The reluctance of African leaders to the EPA stems from many sources. First, it may not be unconnected with the perceived failure of the EPA between ACP and the EU, which was marketed as a silver bullet for industrialization and development. Neither has happened. Second, relations between developed countries and less developed ones has been characterized by unfair agreements, which had kept the poorer countries in perpetual bondage. Third, the EPA is viewed with suspicion as a second neoliberal entry for the benefit of European capital. The EPA is a reminder of the neoliberal policies of the IMF and the World Bank of the 1980s, which impoverished the poor, reduced and slashed jobs, deregulated the economy with serious consequences for many African countries. So what's the way forward? The new EU-Africa partnership must be built on strong foundations based on true partnership. How to build this trust with African leaders, much less the citizenry, is a difficult but not impossible task. Civil society, labor, and other stakeholders must be involved. The win-win proposition for both EU and Africa in building growing investments, skills, and keeping potential migrants at home should be emphasized. The state, and not the private sector, must be the engine room that will drive this process. This is a political decision and not an economic one. On this, we are together with Paul Collier. A successful Africa-EU partnership will make both continents prosper without undermining either. This will keep irregular migrants at home, douse political tension, and reduce instability in Africa, and hopefully check the advance of right-wing anti-immigrant parties in Europe. It is possible for both sides to win. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Je passe la parole maintenant à notre présidente de la commission développement, personne tout à fait proche du continent africain, Linda McCavan.
Yeah, thanks, Elena. Now I'm looking around this room and thinking, it's very late. Yeah. I'm the last speaker. Lots has been said, most of which I agree with, and I had lots of things to say. But maybe I'm just going to talk about one thing, and maybe then throw a challenge to you, particularly our guests from Africa, the young people who I know, because I met them on Monday, have so much passion and energy and want to change their countries and move them forward in the way that Paul Collier described. So, and the theme today is migration, and I don't want to talk about that and the issues, but the one good thing about the migration debate in Europe and the political fallout is that it is making European countries think about we need to do more with Africa. Because, to be honest, in many countries, until then, there was a tendency to think, we've got problems at home. We've had the financial crisis. We have 30% youth unemployment in Italy. I don't know what Elena will know the numbers for Spain. We have lots of problems inside Europe. So maybe we should look after our own house and not spend so much in Africa. And in my country, there's been in Britain big campaign against aid in our tabloid newspapers, saying, oh, aid is a waste of money, it goes to all the wrong people, they're all corrupt. But this debate is making us, Europe, think, no, we must, as Federica Mogherini said, we must spend some of our money with our neighbours because that's in our common interest. So today's debate is coming at a very important time in the European Union, and that's because the EU is planning its spending programmes for the next period. The EU works in 7-year spending rounds, and the current spending round is going to run out at the end of 2019, and they're planning, I don't know if you spoke about it, the multi-annual financial framework, MFF, and they're planning how much the EU will spend as a whole, and within that, where that money should go. And in the next few months, the decisions are going to be taken in the European Union about that. And MEPs, us, and the ministers from different governments are going to be involved in making those decisions. Now, in the terms of support for Africa, there's a program on the table. It's called the NDICE, I can't remember what it's called. It's the instrument for neighbourhood. It's a new instrument. It combines all the old funding for all the EU's external action. And it's worth about, the plan, it's only a proposal from the European Commission. It's worth about 89 billion euros over 7 years. And within that 89 billion, the biggest chunk will be allocated to sub-Saharan Africa. And most of the money from this pot of money, the decisions won't be taken in Brussels about how that money is spent. Most of that money is allocated geographically. What does that mean? It means that in each African country, there will be a joint plan with the European Union on how to spend that money. And I suppose what Paul Collier was saying, and I don't know whether you agree with him, and maybe we have 15 minutes for questions, he says basically, business as usual is not good enough. We cannot simply go on doing what we've done for years because that's not going to work. Because we're spending money and good money goes after bad and we don't see progress. Now, I think that's true to a point, but there has been some progress. And so we can't say everything that's happened before is bad. But if we are going to change and we are going to deliver, and we talked on Monday about Sustainable Development Goals, I know you know all about them, if we are going to deliver on that programme, well, this period of EU spending round coincides with the 2030 agenda because it's from 2020 to 2027. So if you haven't actually, by 2027, got towards the Sustainable Development Goals, frankly, you're not going to deliver Sustainable Development Goals. And the good thing about the UN SDGs is that it does do what Federica asked us to do, which is move away from the colonial aid-donor relationship. It says It's not about our countries giving aid. It's about we have common problems in the world, climate change, big companies who won't pay their tax, inequalities, because it's not just in Africa where people can't get work. We're seeing a trend in our countries of globalization, robotization, and people are losing their jobs. So these are huge challenges for capitalism in this period. You know, they're saying that lawyers will lose jobs, middle-class people will start to lose jobs to robots, not in the past like it was, you know, workers lost them who work in factories. So if you think that this pot of money, it's not huge, but it's a lot of money, as Federica Mogherini said, it's more than any other donor. What do you think it would be used on in your country? And I think in that sense, Paul Collier is right. You can't do everything, but what would be the actual priority? Because there's a danger that, and we are working on these programs now, and what we will agree will simply be a framework which will allow lots of different things to be funded. But it's in your own countries where the decisions will be taken on where that money should go. So what would be the most, and I think there is a lack of, in the past, transparency about the relations between your governments and the European Union and where that money should go and how those decisions should be taken. But the only way for you to influence that is to call your own politicians to account and hold them to account, just as we here have to hold our politicians to account. So I think about it, what is the priority? What would make the biggest difference? And each country will be very different. I mean, in Europe we are 28 countries for now, and each country is different. So I don't think we can say if we have this, it's good for Africa. No, because it will depend on the country and what its priorities are. So I think if you could start thinking about the challenges, that would be what the priorities are. I think, is it energy? Is it infrastructure? Is it education? What is it that would change your country for the better? And then, because countries that have a plan, a coherent plan, I think are the ones who actually deliver real change. And governments last for a few years, 5 years, even in my country, and you have to have a clear plan for your period of government. So maybe I'll leave it there, Elena. I'll leave that challenge and hope that we can have a dialogue for the 10 minutes left.
Nous n'avons pas trop de temps pour ce dialogue, mais notre conversation ne finit pas aujourd'hui, bien sûr. Je vais laisser le temps à notre vice-présidente Tania Fayon pour qu'elle fasse un peu le point, les conclusions et sa propre appréciation sur la discussion d'aujourd'hui. On doit finir à 1h30, donc peut-être qu'on pourrait prendre quand même 1 ou 2 questions. Si vous en avez à faire. Oui, 2. Non, mais vous avez déjà, donc on va laisser la possibilité à... Et vous avant aussi. Donc on va laisser la possibilité pour une fois à ces 2 messieurs. Oui, vous. Vous et derrière. Oui. Non, vous. Et ça marche parce qu'il faut...
Ouais, ça marche.
Ça marche. OK, je vais faire juste une remarque en 1 minute. Ce n'est pas une question en particulier, mais il y a un aspect évoqué par le professeur, et ça aussi, ça peut englober, donc, et enclencher un développement au niveau africain. Nous avons besoin, 1, d'une intégration régionale vraiment efficace. De 2, il y a ce qu'on appelle le protectionnisme éducateur. C'est ce que dont on a besoin. Il faut que les pays européens, il faut que le monde entier laisse la chance aux Africains de mettre en œuvre ce programme de protectionnisme éducateur, c'est-à-dire donner la chance pendant 10 ans peut-être à l'Afrique, à son économie et à son industrie de se développer. Pourquoi? Pour retenir ces jeunes au sein du continent, au sein des pays. Je pense que c'est vraiment l'une des solutions. Et je sais qu'il y a déjà un programme en cours avec l'Union européenne, donc il faut encourager la création et la maturité du tissu industriel africain. C'est clair. Merci.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Gafaru from Ghana. I would want to make a rather modest attempt at responding to Linda's question. I think, and I can speak for Ghana, I think that the most important area that we should, going forward, be looking at is how to create sustainable, decent jobs for the people of, for the young people of Africa. And I think that the issues are related. I mean, and I think earlier Paul mentioned that we need to, for instance, look at how to build the infrastructure of African countries. And in this regard, we need to focus a lot more on investing in energy and also in building capacity by way of education and strong institutions that would ensure that leaders are accountable, because we are not just interested in receiving monies from the EU, but then also how do we ensure that those monies that are coming in are going to the right areas to create a sort of sustainable and decent jobs that the young people of Africa need. Thank you. Oh, sure.
Qui parle? Non, 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 on n'a plus le temps. Merci. Merci, je m'excuse. Je passe la parole directement à notre vice-présidente Tania Fayon. Tu vas... Ah, tu peux répondre, mais non, c'était un commentaire. Oui, oui. No, it was a comment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Don't be afraid. I will not take long time, but I know you're all tired. Just to make few conclusion remarks, because you're not tired. Good. We continue.
Young, you know.
Excellent. But you see here now we are three ladies that are working very hard on migration issues in the European Parliament, and I can tell you it's not very easy to be today in Europe politician to try to find solution on migration challenges. You know what is a discourse, what is a rhetoric, and how much we are losing our ground, and we can be also critical to ourselves, because if you look what is happening in Europe for the last few years, we weren't managed to find proper, efficient solutions to the migration challenges. And I often say rather that we had not a migration crisis, but an institutional crisis. And we are still lacking a lot of solidarity, and there is a lot of, I would say, very dangerous populist, radical extremist discourse where we are really losing and working in a very difficult environment to find long-lasting solutions. And I will pick up on what Linda said, that we have on both sides, in Europe and in Africa, hold our politicians into account. Because I see it on our side, what is happening. It's a lot of manipulation, a lot of lies, a lot of false information. We are really in a situation that we cannot find effective solutions. And I will just briefly tackle two things. First, what was very important was about youth. Africa, we have to focus on youth. Same goes in Europe. We have basically so similar challenges that we can really learn a lot from each other, benefit from each other, work with each other, not against each other. So it's a chance maybe to renew our cooperation. I was very myself touched or concerned when I listened to African friends in Côte d'Ivoire when we had a meeting with parliamentarians. It was like a fight at some point, because they were saying, you Europeans, you just have economic interest, tell it frankly, that is how it is, and we feel like, like someone is exploiting us. Just be frank with us. It's not everything that black and white, of course, and we have to pick up on the good development stories where we can invest, give chances to young people from both continents, especially to learn from each other, and invest there where we know what we are doing. I saw quite some good projects also when I was traveling in Africa that were European pilot projects. We have to pick up those that work with civil society, with the grassroots, engage people on the ground more, and of course you have to, like we have to in Europe, hold our politicians into account. It's very brave. It's very right, because I think we have common values. This is to fight for human rights, for dignity of our citizens, for young generation, to give them better prosperity. And now we have this discussion that is very sensitive in Europe on global compact. That is something that we need to seriously understand. Migration is a global phenomenon, and our continent has always been a continent of migration, will always be. This is the fact, and we have to find also global solutions to these answers. And that is why it will be very important that the EU strongly takes a lead under the umbrella of UN to endorse this UN Global Compact in Marrakesh. We'll be happy to go there with the European Parliament delegation, and I'm traveling next Sunday to Niger, and I hope also to learn some good experiences there and to see the situation on the ground. We go with some colleagues from the Parliament, so if anyone has some recommendation, I will be happy to later or tomorrow talk with you. And there are also small steps just to now really finalize. We are all trying to work for the best. And let us try to work with pessimism. With optimism, sorry. With optimism. I learned through my political life that pessimism doesn't solve any problems. So we try to be optimists. We try to take best practices. And one very little is that here is Madeline, for example, sitting in the room from South Africa, that I recently met in my country, Slovenia. That is part of the same study I did, and we developed a fantastic network with the women that are fighting for women's rights in Africa. Little project, project by project, but working together. And this is the step forward. So that will be my final remark. We are friends. We have same visions and wishes, and I'm happy that we as a group are hosting this conference because we are progressive forces. And I hope that we will continue this hard work tomorrow and all go back home with good, inspiring ideas and try to bring some concrete results. So thank you for today, and we continue tomorrow.
Thank you very much. See you soon. Tomorrow, maybe.